It is so important, man, that young preachers, faithfully, while you're trying to learn, also be encouraged to find your own voice, and to find your own slot and to find your own footing, and realize, who you are and what the Lord has gifted you with, and use that, and not so much try to mimic the rhetorical skills of others that the Lord may not have, particularly gifted you with. Yeah.
Hi, welcome to the Expositors Collective Podcast, episode 155. I'm your host, Mike Neglia, and the voice that you just heard is Pastor Tony Carter. He leads East Point Church in East Point, Georgia, which is right outside of Atlanta. And in this conversation, we speak about finding your own voice and the challenges and pitfalls that come in the journey of a preacher discovering their own voice and essentially growing in confidence. And for the second half of the conversation, there's some incredibly valuable stuff in there about the necessity of training up new preachers within the local church. And then also, Tony gives some really practical tips and also encouragements for us to be doing it in our congregations and in our local contexts. All right, this is a great conversation, and I'm going to get out of the way so that you get to hear it for yourself. I hope that this podcast and all that we do at the Expositors Collective helps you to grow in your personal study and your public proclamation of God's Word. Well, hey, welcome to the Expositors Collective Podcast. I am thrilled to be speaking with Pastor Tony Carter. Tony, good morning and welcome to the podcast.
Oh, good morning, Mike, and thanks for having me.
Hey, man, I'm really excited. We've been emailing back and forth for quite a while. The suspense has been building. I've been really looking forward to talking to you.
Awesome, man.
Well, the first time, and I've said a tiny bit of this, I haven't told you the whole reason or the whole backstory. So I heard you first on the very good H.B. Charles podcast on preaching, and you guys were talking about Jonah, and
Right.
and I love Jonah. I've taught Jonah 3 times,
Yeah.
to three different groups, not to the same people 3 times in a row. How many times have you taught Jonah?
Whoa, wow, that's a good question. Roughly, I want to say how many times I've preached through Jonah? 4, maybe 5. Yeah, 4 or 5 times.
Okay. Well, I was feeling a little bit sheepish about preaching it 3 times, but now I feel fine.
Yeah.
So I listened in because like I said, I like Jonah, and I was like, this is great. This guy is great. Who is this Anthony Carter guy? So I really enjoyed that conversation, and
We appreciate it.
yeah, and this kind of happens, and then. About a week or 2 later, I was gonna guest speak at a friend's church, and I was assigned a passage. He asked me to preach from Psalm 20, and I was traveling, so I didn't have all my books with me, and I was like, well, I should look up some stuff online. And I downloaded, I went to thirdmill.com or thirdmill.org and just downloaded, I typed in Psalm 20 and just downloaded the first 2 or 3 sermons on there. And I'm, driving, listening to them in the car. And the very first person that I downloaded was Anthony Carter. And I was listening to Psalm 20. I'm like, this is so good. This is so good. And I was like, who is this? And I checked my phone and then wrote it down. And I think it was Anthony Carter on the podcast, on the sermon, and then Tony Carter. And I was like, wait, is this the same guy? And it was. So you have surprise blessed me twice in the period of 1 month. And I was like, I got to talk to this guy. So
that's awesome. I wasn't aware that Third Mill had that up. Wow.
Yeah, it was a great one on Psalm 20, and it was just what I needed. And, so So thanks. I ended up not actually even preaching, but I was personally blessed by it. So,
well, as the Lord would have it, right?
Yeah, I enjoyed thinking I was going to preach on Psalm 20, and I enjoyed the beginning of like digging into the text and listening to a few sermons on it and beginning that process. So,
awesome.
So that wasn't your most recent sermon, but that was one of the more recent ones. It was from the beginning of COVID, and so you were talking about like face coverings and smiles being unable to be seen, but you were speaking about like the pleasure of God and his, we might not see his smile, but he's smiling upon us, and it's really, really encouraging.
Awesome, man. Yeah, Psalms for the seasons. Now I remember Psalms for the seasons of COVID. That's right. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I actually, I actually got COVID that week. So it was, it encouraged me. Yeah, that's the reason why I didn't preach that Sunday.
Yeah.
Was, Yeah, my wife all of a sudden, she was like drinking coffee and she's like, Mike, I can't smell this. Can you smell this? I'm like, I can't smell it either. We better go get tested. And we had COVID. And so because of that, I didn't do the guest speaking at the place. But anyway, it was all part of the Lord's plan to make me listen to that sermon.
Yes, as the Lord would have it. That's right.
So that was a sermon from 2020. So what I want to ask is like, Tony, can you remember your very first sermon you ever heard? Sorry, you ever preached? What was your first sermon that you preached?
Can I remember it? I wish I don't remember it. Yeah, I remember it. And it was, it was rather... to put it kindly, interesting, I guess. Okay. I preached from Mark 11 on have faith in God.
Okay.
Right? And
sounds good so far.
Yeah, that's about where the good part ended. So I think I preached for about an hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes. Man. I'm all over the place. And and just saying everything that I could possibly say about anything. And it wasn't a disaster, but let's just say I'm glad it wasn't recorded.
Wow. An hour and a half, man. That is.
Yeah, and I did it all from memory, man. I did it all just, it was.
So do you mean you didn't bring notes up with you?
No.
Maybe you should have.
Right, exactly. I say that all the time. I tell young preachers that if you don't plan what you say, you're going to say what you don't plan. And so, you need to plan out what you're going to say. So just to keep yourself from putting your foot in your mouth too many times. And I put my foot in my mouth quite a bit that day. And I remember afterwards, one of the older preachers there came up to me. He said, son, you don't have to preach the whole Bible in one sermon. Yeah. Because I was there. I had scripture references for everything all over the place. So it was,
So it sounds like you got feedback, which is good. How did you feel? I guess the question, when you got down from the pulpit or from behind the music stand or whatever, like how did you feel it went? Did you kind of feel like, it was a bit long, or did you feel like, man, I nailed it?
No, I felt like it was long. I felt it was longer than I had thought that it would be. But in that context, in that Black Baptist, church context, they are so encouraging of young preachers, and so everybody was so kind, everybody was so encouraging. And so from that standpoint, I thought it was pretty good. But the more that I began to preach and learn what preaching is and to study the scriptures and learn how to interpret the scriptures, I realized that, that thing was just awful. But the people in the church, they were so gracious and encouraging through it all. So I got the assurance that it was a lot better than it really was.
Okay. Well, that's kind of them. You said that they're, that church is very encouraging of young preachers.
Right.
How young were you? So
I wasn't, a child preacher or anything like that. I was in college, so I was, matter of fact, I was transitioning between schools. And so I was in my early 20s.
Okay. All right.
And so I wasn't that, I was a novice, to the whole idea of Bible study and Bible reading and things like that. But I was a young man.
Okay. And did you get a chance to preach there again soon after or ever?
I did. I did get a chance to preach there again later on. And by that time I was, a little bit more seasoned. But I remember my second sermon after that was maybe a year or so later.
Okay.
And I kind of realized what my shortfalls were.
Yeah.
And so the second sermon I preached was a lot better. And that was because it was a sermon that I had heard Dr. Tony Evans preach.
Okay.
And I basically preached what he preached verbatim from Hebrews chapter 12. And I had listened to that sermon, numerous times. And by that time I had it, down. And so when I preached, I added a little bit of my own kind of flavor to it, but for the most part, it was Tony Evans verbatim. So I could say that one was a lot better than my first one.
Okay, yeah, it has to be. Wow. Now, did nobody knew, right?
No, nobody knew that.
Yeah, that's
that, but that was the travails of a young minister.
Yeah. So do you endorse
and find his voice.
That kind of plagiarism these days?
Endorse it? No, I don't endorse it. What I do recommend is that young preachers listen to preachers.
Okay.
And when you do that, particularly young, and you don't have a lot of guidance, and I didn't have a lot of guidance, then you may fall into that trap. I mean, that's understandable. You listen to guys long enough, you're going to sound like them. You're going to repeat the things that they say.
Yeah.
And if you don't have any guidance on how to kind of, work with that type of scenario, then you very easily will find yourself, saying the things that they say.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
I don't endorse that per se, but I do endorse, spending time with, listening to other preachers.
Yeah. I was actually gonna bring that up because I heard you on an older episode of the Front Porch podcast, and you were talking about that you do like to listen to sermons online on the same passage, much like myself. And you said sometimes it's like people that you knew and people you didn't know. You just want to hear these different takes on it. Yeah, and obviously, like I said, that's exactly what I did. That's how I've come across you.
Yeah, is
that still your practice?
Yes, it is. And most of the time, it's preachers that I don't know.
Really?
Most times preachers that I don't know. Because I like to get. I like to see what other people are seeing. One, to confirm that what I'm seeing is not so unique. That it could be just, something that is totally, foreign to the text. So I want to make sure that I'm saying the things that others are saying, seeing the things that others are seeing, and two, also, I like to see how, not only what they see, but I like to see the various ways that people express it. I like to hear the various voices and the experiences that particular text might pull out of people. And so that just, it's encouraging me. It helps me devotionally, as well as, professionally. And so I still do that every week, just about every week.
Yeah, I that's something that because generally, back when things were normal, I would try to have my sermon done or mostly done by Friday. And then on Saturday, I would, cut the grass or just do chores. And I'd open up the, Apple Podcast app. And then I would just search for my section of scripture on there. And then it just brings up all of the podcasts that have that. Maybe you do the same thing.
I go to Sermon Audio and
okay.
and listen to pull up a passage that I'm working on and then scroll through it and see if anybody's got a catchy title for my.
Yeah, because titles are hard.
Yeah, yes, they are. Yes, they are. They are. And so if somebody's got an interesting title for my passage, I was like, I wonder how you worked that out. And so.
Well, I would just find like, I think sermon audio like almost probably has a little bit more, and maybe I don't know, but like, do they have more boundaries or parameters, or is there some kind of vetting process that you need to be on sermon audio, or do they let anybody on?
You know
Apple,
what? That's
Apple
a good
podcast,
question.
man, it could be anyone, and it is.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
And I kind of enjoy that.
Yeah, I would think that sermon audio has a vetting process that before they upload. Now, I'm not totally familiar with the workings and the going on the sermon audio, so I don't know.
It's an assumption. Yeah. So
yeah.
Well, yeah, but it's sometimes it's to listen to even just somebody get it just totally wrong. I've been cutting the grass, listen to some dude just allegorize everything, and it's just kind of like it's a frustrating experience, but just to be like, okay, well, turns out I'm right, or I've considered this other way of looking at it, and this is just utter nonsense. Yeah. But it kind of also causes me to be thinking through things like, well, am I sure my interpretation is right? Yes, I am, because I'm hearing this and I completely disagree with it. But there might be a sentence here or there that's valuable, even in the most surprising of places. But I do that only after I have my main stuff written down.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So, and then of course there's also thirdmill.org, which is probably much more vetted than Apple Podcasts. And
yes, very much so.
Yeah, and sermon audio, and then is even more kind of niche or specific.
Oh, I am sure about that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Tony. So that's cool. I'm glad to hear. I'm glad to hear that. So, like, I guess, you've grown a lot as a preacher since you were 20, and one of the most obvious things is like your sermons are pretty short. Obviously, when you compare them to an hour and a half, but the ones that I've been listening to, they seem to clock in at about 30 minutes or even under. So that's probably a deliberate choice. To be reducing the length?
Well, I think you probably clocked in on COVID. And so during COVID, because a lot of it was, recorded and people weren't present as much. So then I tried deliberately to kind of make those sermons shorter. Normally, if you were to tell the people at our church that I preach short sermons, they would probably ask you, when did you start listening? But so you probably clocked in on those COVID sermons, particularly in last year. Normally my sermons go 40, 45 minutes.
Is that right? Okay.
I try to keep it under 45 minutes. They frequently go over, but I try to keep it under 45 minutes. I think a good sermon, 35 to 40 minutes. I mean, you should be able to preach a good solid, encouraging, informative, faithful sermon of a text within that time frame. I'm always, one of my favorite persons to learn from, and one of my professors in seminary was Sinclair Ferguson. And one of the things that I'm always just so encouraged by with Dr. Ferguson is his ability to say a lot in a short period of time.
Yeah.
And you listen to him for 30, 40 minutes and you feel like that, wow, he's covered much of that text in that short period. And I think that's something that younger preachers could think about. Longer is not always better.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. I, along with probably a lot of people, maybe my age, were really influenced by, a lot of, let's say, preachers from Seattle in the early 2000s,
right,
who would preach for an hour and a half.
Yes.
And and it worked, or it was, and so, hearing that and thinking that's great. I can't wait to bless my congregation with an hour and a half's worth of content. And I think there needs to be, a certain, just like skill set, or, if you want to call it an anointing, or just a cultural zeitgeist or something that kind of like permits that sort of thing. But I think that's definitely the exception rather than the rule. And editing is often an act of love that we're showing to our people.
That is true, Mike. Not everybody can preach well for an hour and a half. And so I think you're right. A lot of people in mimicking, certain folks, certain people with a certain skill set and rhetorical ability would try to mimic that, not having that rhetorical ability or skill set.
Yeah.
And so whereas the original person might have been able to communicate in a way that is encouraging, those who would try to mimic him, are more discouraging to the people who are having to listen to them than not. And so it is so important, man, that young preachers, faithfully, while you're trying to learn, also be encouraged to find your own voice, and to find your own slot and to find your own footing, and realize, who you are and what the Lord has gifted you with,
right?
And use that, and not so much try to mimic the rhetorical skills of others that the Lord may not have, particularly gifted you with. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've heard you mention elsewhere, and we were talking before we hit record, that you've taught some kind of like classes in churches that were geared towards like teaching younger or newer preachers. Yeah. So I'd love to hear about that, and then maybe specifically kind of follow up on what you just said. Like, what do you think are the any more temptations that younger or newer preachers are facing?
Yeah. Well, I think, probably more than anything, because of the way that sermons by others are so readily available.
Yeah.
And the fact that we have a culture where we kind of lionize certain preachers, and preachers have large platforms, and so and we easily can get enamored with certain preachers. That I think that the biggest pitfall is that young preachers are trying to be people that they're not. And so they're trying to imitate the preachers who have big platforms, and almost with the idea that, oh wow, that's how you get to that big platform. Yeah. Rather than being faithful as being the ultimate goal, faithful to God and faithful to use the gifts that God has given you for His glory, wherever that platform might lead. The most difficult thing, I think, is to find your own voice. To find your own voice. Oh. And with so many voices out there, it almost is difficult. But the most faithful preachers are those who find a voice and the experiences that the Lord has given them, and then that voice is preached through those experiences, for the glory of God. I think that's where young preachers probably find the most pitfalls.
Yeah.
And how they have to be encouraged not to.
Yeah, and also realizing that it's a challenge sometimes to find your own voice when the other voices. I mean, just even look at your own story. Your first sermon, that was your voice. Right. Your second sermon, that was Tony Evans' voice, and it was a lot better.
Yes, that's right.
So you have to realize, we're acknowledging that there's the challenge too, that the challenge of taking your authentic voice and doing the work yourself, and then editing and then presenting it. It's harder work. It's almost riskier
Yeah.
but the payoff, the reward is that it's the real you with your real people, rather than the flashy version, rather than Tony Evans. Sorry. Yeah. Rather than Tony Evans.
And it comes through preaching. It comes through, you have to preach. That's the only way you're going to find your voice. I remember, playing sports, and one of my coaches would always tell me, the only way to get better at football is to play football. The only way you're going to get better at basketball, you got to play basketball. And the only way you're going to get better at preaching and find your voice is you have to preach, and you have to go through that trial and error. You have to go through those stages in which your voice is developed. Your personality in preaching is developed, and so that's why it's so important that young preachers be in an atmosphere, be in a community where they're allowed to do that, where they are allowed to preach and they are allowed to develop their voices like that. Unfortunately, some people have to do that on their own, and it becomes a bigger struggle than it is for others. But I think the ideal way is that you are in a community, you are in a place where you are allowed and you are encouraged, to develop your own voice in preaching.
So how can that, so let's speak to let's say the older pastors that might be listening, and there could be younger people in their church or in their ministry that they're trying to they want to see them raised up, but yet there's the real risk of, well, if I give that person a Sunday morning, what if they go for an hour and a half, or what if it's terrible? And, I find delegation to be a real challenge. I'm trying to grow as a delegator, because, I could just do it myself. Why would I have somebody else do it? And I think a lot of people can view the pulpit in that way. Why should I let somebody young have it? They'll only mess it up. Or I've worked so hard to get the church to this level, and if I let this person have it, even for one Sunday, it's going to ruin it. Could you speak to the older grumpy people that aren't going to, that say you're going to pry this pulpit out of my cold, dead hands?
Yeah, no doubt. And, unfortunately, that is a reality in some places. That you're right. That is a reality in some places. The first thing I would say is to realize that the ultimate goal, right? The ultimate goal is to be able to, if the Lord tarries, to hand off that ministry, and to hand off that ministry in a way that ministry is healthy. And, the generation that comes behind would be able to find that you had been faithful. And if you deny the reality of that, if you deny the necessity of that, then that is not being faithful. That just is not being faithful. If you are not prepared and able to hand that, that ministry off when the time comes, and for it to be in a healthy and a good spot, because you have lorded over that ministry, then, despite what you might be thinking, you are not being faithful in that. Faithfulness is being able to hand it to the next generation, as seamlessly as possible, so that, they can say, so that you could say that those who come behind me will find us, that we have been faithful. So that's the first thing I would say, to the older guy. Evaluate what really faithfulness is here. Mm-hmm. Faithfulness is not lording it over.
And it's not gripping onto it so tight.
That's right. It's not holding on to that thing so tightly, that they have to pry it away from you. And then they find that after you're gone, they have to totally rebuild it, and find out, all the tragedy that has been left in the wake, all the tragedy that's left in the wake of that. Yeah. And so with that said, I'd strongly encourage that find ways. I don't recommend that you just hand over Sunday morning one day to a novice preacher at all. I don't recommend that at all. Because that point, you might have to come back and do a lot of more damage control than is necessary. But I do think that there needs to be ways in which in that local church they are able to develop preaching voices, whether that is doing, special evening services, doing midweek services, opportunities that are developed for young preachers in order to exercise and really to evaluate, to see, okay, well, you may say that you're called, but if nobody else is identifying that call, the God is not confirming that call in anybody else's ears, then we might need to reevaluate, if you're really hearing that call. If God has called you to preach, then he's also called people to hear. And so we got to make sure that both of those callings are lining up. And you can do that in different ways and develop settings in which that takes place. That's encouraging for them, as healthy as well. And, another thing that, I strongly encourage, a young preacher who was first starting out, I always tell them, man, you need to preach from a manuscript, when you're first starting out, you need to preach from a manuscript. And you may not, like that, but I just want you to get in the habit early on of understanding that planning what you say keeps you from saying things you don't plan, and also it helps others who are listening to you, and want to help you in fulfilling your calling, to be able to walk with you through it, having anticipated what you're going to say, and then having looked forward to how you said it. Yeah. And so I think that too keeps them from going that hour and a half.
Sure.
And we'll say, guy, hey, we're going to stick to the script. Okay.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're describing like this, the act of raising up the next generation of preachers. It sounds like it involves the whole church, that it involves a leader who's willing to take a risk or to let go, and also to help. It involves the young person who's ready to take instruction and stick to the script, and then also the congregation that's saying like we want to hear, and we'll also to a healthy degree to give feedback to help this person get better.
Yeah, and I grew up in a Black Baptist tradition. And in the Black Baptist tradition, that's what you had. You had, a desire always to raise up young preachers. And then there was always a desire, a commitment in that congregation to encourage young preachers. And there was nothing formal about it. There was no script. There was no syllabus in which, we went through point B, point A, and there were no classes or anything like that. You learned by observation.
Yeah.
And then you learn by trial and error, but there was always encouragement, and there was always a sense of community.
Yeah.
There was space for the younger preachers to exercise and learn their gifts. Now there wasn't too much space. You always knew your place.
Okay.
You always knew your place, and because you'll get sat down, pretty quickly. And if you forget your place, you may not have a place for very long. So there's always a level of respect.
So it sounds better than nothing. But it sounds like what you're doing. It sounds like you had like actual classes, or you had a more like official on-ramp for the teachers and preachers in your church, if I'm correct, understanding you correctly.
Well, in our church we have a like I said, we kind of try to develop platforms in which those guys can on-ramp into preaching, right? Yeah. And so whether it starts off with teaching classes and teaching Sunday school, and then we have what we call our preaching Wednesdays, and so like once a month, we'd have one of the young guys who aspires to preach on a Wednesday evening. Yeah. Encourage people to come out and to listen to them and give them a less intimidating, setting in which to preach.
So the people that come on Wednesday, they also, to some degree, not to put it negatively, but they know what they're getting in for. They're coming to hear a new preacher.
To hear a new young preacher as he's trying to work through hearing. And it's been great. It's been great. Some guys get up there a couple of times and realize, Pastor, this isn't me.
Okay.
Other guys have gotten up there and afterwards, I might tell them, you know what? I don't think this is a good fit.
Okay. And hopefully you all agree, but there could be some awkwardness, but that's maybe mildly awkward to have a conversation like that.
Right.
But it's really awkward when you come time to retire and there's nobody to take over, that's far more awkward. So it's good to have those awkward interactions now rather than at the end.
Yep. Amen, brother. Amen to that.
Okay, so you know what? So speaking about other people in your church, I know that you've recently co-written a book with one of the elders of your church called Dying to Speak. Would you mind talking to us a little bit about that? Because I think that kind of connects really well with the season that we're in leading up to Easter.
Yeah. So, I had the privilege of writing the book and getting one of the elders here, Lee Fowler, to collaborate with me on it. It's called Dying to Speak, Meditations from the Cross. And basically it's looking at what we've commonly come to know as the 7 last sayings or the 7 last words of Christ as he is enduring the crucifixion on the cross. And basically it is an examination of those words and what those words and how those words speak to us, the redemption that Christ accomplished for us. And in speaking that redemption, how that now calls us to be and to live redemptive lives in light of what Christ did, and indeed, and specifically in light of what he said from the cross. Yeah. And he was dying to say it. So that's how you get the idea of dying to speak.
Yeah. Well, we at our church, and along with many churches, we would have, the Good Friday service where we annually revisit those 7 sayings. Right. Having different preachers within the church to come up and to share 15 minutes or so on each one of them, which is, for us, I thought it was cutting edge when I, made it up. Turns out everyone does it.
Everyone does it.
Yeah.
Everyone does it.
I thought, man, we called it tenebrae. It's this Latin term, we are just incredibly, the church of the future, but turns out that's just, everyone's been doing that for a long time.
Yeah. But we've done it with collaborating with other churches. So that's one of the days of the year where we find other churches to join with and have a special Good Friday service. And a lot of times it would be going over those 7 sayings of Christ. So one, it provides our people an opportunity to fellowship with church that are not particularly like our church. Mm-hmm. And then, and also at the same time to meditate on these, important words.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, I would just, want to commend this book to anybody that's maybe considering that type of service or even just probably for personal meditation leading up to Good Friday.
Right.
It's available. Is it Presbyterian and Reformed Publishing?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. P&R Publishing, Presbyterian and Reformed Publishing.
Okay. Yeah.
And came out earlier this month. And I would hope, I hope it's encouraging. I hope people would, read it and be encouraged. There's some uniqueness in the way that we approach it, thinking about the imperatives of what Christ was saying, and so that, the chapters are entitled, be forgiven.
Yeah.
But Christ says, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. In other words, Christ was accomplishing our forgiveness. And so now for us, the call is to be forgiven, live in light of what Christ has done, because God doesn't call us to be anything except what he has provided for us in Christ, and so be that. And as you be that, then we are now called to be those who offer forgiveness to others, and so each chapter is built along that lines.
Yeah. Be
who Christ said you are, and now live and be that to other people.
Yeah. The good old indicative imperative. Right. Yeah. But so valuable. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes, as well as, you've written more books than most people have read. So, so I want to, highlight that. Could you, so kind of from pivoting from there, maybe second to last question that I have for you is like, so what is your weekly rhythm look like? We kind of bounced on that, but like, as you're coming up towards, next Sunday, what does your week look like?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've been writing and preparing sermons for quite a while now, and fact of the matter is, unlike probably you, Mike, or most people, I don't know, I write my sermons out. I write longhand. I have a pad, and I don't write my sermon on the computer.
Really?
I know.
Okay.
Because I just grew up writing.
Sure.
And whether it's a book or whether it's a sermon, I write it out, and then I put it on my computer.
Okay.
Which my friends tell me, you mean you write your sermon twice?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I never thought about it like that, but I guess I do. I write it in my notebook, and then I write it. I type it on my computer, and then I transfer it to my iPad, which I preach from an iPad on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
You see, so
I obviously you're a tech savvy guy. Like we're on Zoom right now, and everyone's gotten a little bit more tech savvy.
Right.
In 2020, we've all had to. However, like I love stationery, and I love pens, and I love nice pencils and good paper. What kind of notebooks do you use? Let's talk about notebooks. Do you have them with you?
Well, basically, I use a composition notebook that you would probably buy for college or anything like that. I just go to the store and get a pack of composition notebooks that you use in for exam in any college class, and basically have a stack of old sermons in composition notebooks.
Oh, Tony, there's better notebooks out there. In fact,
what do you have, Mike?
In fact, I'm going to send you this. I'm going to send you this. The Leuchtturm 1917, German. Wow. They're German. And these were on sale in the after Christmas sale.
Okay.
I bought an extra one because I said, I'm going to find somebody to give this to.
Oh,
so
wow.
I'll get your address after this and mail you this. They got I'm using one now.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, they got such like, they got the nice elastic. I don't want to turn this into an advertisement. Although maybe if I do, they'll sponsor the podcast. Who knows? But yeah, it's got really great thick paper. If you use like a fountain pen, like it like absorbs the ink really well, doesn't smear. So I'll send you this. And you're using your last composition notebook. I promise you're going to try this and you're never going to go back.
Well, I appreciate that, Mike. That's awesome, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'm in my church office, and right across the street is actually a stationery store, and it's kind of dangerous. Yeah, it's kind of dangerous because I really like it, and I'll just go in to browse and then come out with like a new fountain pen or a new notebook. And there's worse addictions out there.
You asked about my rhythms for the week, and well, Mondays is like my down day, my rest day, and so and my honeydew list day, and so I don't come into the office unless there's something particularly that I have to deal with. But if not, then and I I don't look at the sermon for the next week or anything. I just try to step away from it. Tuesdays, spend, meeting with people, addressing the concerns that people may have. So I kind of lot time slots in there. And then we have a worship staff meeting too. So there's Tuesdays are for meeting times. And at that point, also, I began to kind of ramp up, in the text, looking at it, reading it in various translations, things like that. Not really writing anything down unless there's something particularly that sticks out with me, or, if something comes to me and I say, I need to write this down because I'm not going to remember it later, and so, but then Wednesday comes, like today, and then now I begin to, really begin to write out, thoughts, and looking at the text, and looking at the languages, and seeing any nuances there that need to be highlighted and things like that. And then Thursday, I actually write. That's when I actually start. Thursday is just a day where shut the door and, shut off the phone and let's get it done. And so spend the bulk of Thursday trying to get it just in kind of the frame of what I want to see the sermon become. Friday becomes the absolute fine-tuning, spending a lot of time with commentaries, reading, checking myself, making sure I'm not inventing anything new, things like that. And hopefully, my goal is to finish the sermon by Friday, right? Friday afternoon, Friday evening, that sermon should be on my computer. Taken from the pad on my computer by Friday.
So you kind of write it for the second time on Friday.
Friday. Right. That way too, Saturday is it becomes a kind of a catch-all day in case something happened during the week. And you know how ministry is, things happen, and I get interrupted and not able to do my normal course. Then I know I got Saturday to kind of be a buffer if I need it. But at the same time, I tried to leave Saturday open, particularly when our kids were small. I tried to leave Saturday open and so that daddy could be available, for any of their activities and what they're doing. I never wanted them to say that daddy couldn't come because he was preparing a sermon. I had all week to do that. So, they're not small anymore. So that's not a concern as much as it used to be. But when I was first getting going, I really tried to reserve Saturday if I could.
Make sure it's a gift. It's a gift to them. And it doesn't take that much to just, you're the pastor. That means that you get to actually decide, you're kind of the boss, and not to use all these languages, but, I kind of realized that too late, but I was like, wait, I'm actually in charge of my own schedule. I can just prioritize things, and it doesn't have to eat into Saturday if I don't let it. So
that's right.
I'm kind of saying these are things that I only realized a few years ago. I wish that I started out with that. First, when I had, I only had one kid for a long time, and when he was little, my sermon prep day was Saturday, just because that's what the previous guy did, and I just was like, oh, okay, well, that's what we do. And I had no reason. And just Saturday was when I did it. And my wife would have the kid and I would work on the sermon on Saturday. And then I realized, I don't have to do it. I could, so it's just, I'm just sharing my stupidity, and anyway, hopefully there's no other idiots out there that are willingly choosing Saturday when they don't have to. Now there are bivocational guys out there, and that's the reality. I'm just saying that for me, having been full-time ministry, I just, for some reason, just thought Saturday was the most godly day to do it. And, sorry, honey, can you just take the kid? And daddy needs to go.
And, whether or not it's Saturday, I think for me, the thing was, there needs to be a time where my kids were off and I was off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for me, that was it, because, you know, whenever they had activities, I never wanted them to say that, you know, daddy couldn't participate because he was doing a sermon.
Yeah.
You know, he was doing a sermon. And so then the sermon becomes a thing they associate with not having their dad around.
Sure.
You know, and I never wanted that. And so for other guys, it may be other days, you know, where their kids are off and they spend that, and they're able to spend that time with them. For me, it was Saturday. For a lot of guys, it'll be Saturday because that's when kids are usually off. But other guys may have other days. I just encourage guys to have some time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, this is taking a turn. This is, you know, fathering advice with Tony Carter, but maybe somebody needs to hear this. So, and actually I'm looking at that. We've actually gone longer than I don't want to, I know this is an important day for you, so I don't want to monopolize too much of your time. If I could have one last question, and this could be a short answer. What's an area that you're trying to get better at?
Yeah, that is a good question.
I know it is. It's a great question because we have so much to learn from you, but also to see that, you know, like you're learning as well. Like you haven't arrived. So where do you want to get better?
No, I ask that to preachers all the time. It kind of shocks them. I don't care how old they are. I ask them, I say, how are you getting better at preaching, man?
Wow.
You know, what are you working on? And for me, you know, it's working on controlling the sermon and not allowing the sermon to control me. Okay. And what I mean by that is, you know, allowing myself to express myself within the context of the message and with the context of the text, you know, but sometimes, you know, the tendency, at least for me, is to move beyond the text, right? And to move into things that are beyond the text.
Okay.
You know, and I always have that temptation, you know, and I'm saying, you know, okay, control yourself. Control yourself.
Sure.
Control your emotions, control your thoughts, you know, and allow the text to drive the sermon, and not your own, you know, thoughts, opinions, and emotions about any particular idea or something, because you'll be preaching the text, man, and certain emotions will come out in you and things like that. And, you know, I'm always having control that, you know, and it's a task. It's a task. And I think the better sermons, you know, are those where the sermon is, the text is driving the message. The text is driving the sermon more so than the preacher is. Yeah. Right. And I'm still trying to learn that, man. I'm still trying to learn.
Well, it's you're a role model in that you're continuing to desire to improve, you know. But from Psalm 20, from John chapter 1 and 2 that I've listened to, you know, that seemed to be there already. But you know, may the Lord bless you as you look to even improve in that.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Well, Tony, thanks so much for your time, and even this extra bonus time at the end. I hope that this doesn't cause you to bleed over into Saturday, because I took up too much of your sermon.
That's right. Let's hope not.
Yeah. Well, thanks so very much. Where can we? There'll be links, I guess, for the book and other stuff. But where can people hear these sermons? How can we connect?
Yeah, you can go to our website. All of our messages are on our website at epointchurch.org. Okay. You know, and you know, you can just Google East Point Church, Atlanta, Georgia, and it'll come up. But all of our sermons there. You know, because of COVID, we do Facebook Live. You know, and so on our Facebook page, all of our sermons, our whole services, in fact, are archived there, as well as we have a YouTube channel that archives our services now as well. So COVID has made us have to adjust and do that. But even before COVID, you can go to our website and find all the audio downloads. Yeah.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your ministry and your service to the Lord and to others.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. God bless.
Absolutely. Yeah. My privilege. Well, man, that was great. Tony was just an absolute delight to speak to. I loved learning from him and having that great conversation. Hopefully you enjoyed listening as well. Just a reminder that the link to his most recent book, Dying to Speak, is there in our show notes. Could be a great thing for you to get in these weeks leading up to Good Friday. I just want to give that an extra plug and remind you about that. Okay, so next week I have a wonderful conversation with my friend Brian Stupar from Calvary San Luis Obispo, and we speak about the importance of the preacher's character. And he talks not just about the weekly rhythms that produce sermons, but the lifetime rhythms that produce men of character and godliness that cumulatively probably speaks louder than any single sermon ever will. So here is kind of an extended teaser for next week's episode. Make sure that you're subscribed so that it automatically shows up in your phone or in your device next Tuesday. Well, as always, I hope that this episode and all that we do at the Expositors Collective helps you to grow in your personal study and your public proclamation of God's Word.
I think to just realize, like, God's made me to be me. My voice is a voice that He, as a gift, has given to me. It doesn't mean it's going to resonate with thousands and thousands of people on Instagram, which, I don't have thousands and thousands of followers, and but it might resonate with some. Mm-hmm. And I think the culture that we live in terms of at least Christian context that has kind of created a celebrity status for well-known people. I think more so than ever, there's been a greater suspicion cast over all that. And so I think for me personally, over the past multiple years of just realizing, I just want to be faithful. I just want to be faithful to Jesus. And if my voice goes beyond my city, that's awesome. But, my aim is not to do that. My aim is to really just be faithful as a pastor and as a teacher, Bible teacher, to those whom God brings in my local context. And that requires me to be really faithful myself, to, maintain my character before Jesus, which, involves needing to have certain habits that are developmental for my spiritual status, my walking with Jesus, wanting to be a good dad, good husband. All of those things are really important to the heart of Jesus. I think all of that actually plays into how I perceive being a Bible teacher today. I think over the past 20 years, like many, maybe even 30 years, I've just watched consistently, like wave after wave after wave of really quote unquote successful preacher who had, a large footprint, and has grown and has been recognized, but there's been something about their inner development as a follower of Jesus that has not been healthy. And that's brought about the destruction, not only of their own ministry, their life, but it's actually caused the entire edifice of their preaching career to come crashing in. So in other words, at the end of the day, their preaching ministry has been only as strong as the character that it is built upon that. And, again, without naming names, because I think we already know who those names are, but, over the past 5 years of just watching many super well-known people, even apologists and people that have studied the scripture that I would say are really gifted, that their inner core of who they are as a human being was not up to par, was not in alignment with King Jesus. And I think that brought everything down. So I think for me, just I have a good friend of mine that pastored a church in our city, and I don't know how much this podcast will be listened to on the Central Coast, unless I post it. But I have a good friend of mine that basically had some character challenges. He was a pastor, and his entire world kind of came collapsing in. So I remember just thinking, gosh, this guy had lived and created so much. The church, his influence was very broad, very wide. And yet, because of some of these character elements that were not fully in a right place, it caused all of his preaching to crumble. So I think in our modern world, if you're a young pastor or, old pastor, and you're like, hey, I want my preaching to matter, then I would say what you need to do first and foremost is not try to figure out how to create a podcast, write a book, craft a series of, easy to follow along sermons, but live a life that's full of character before the heart of God. And that's first and foremost. Because if that's not in place, then all of these other auxiliary aims will come crashing in on themselves.